Chapter 1. The Executive Board Betrayal. The air in the 50th floor boardroom of Vanguard Imperial was suffocating. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, my fountain pen poised over the quarterly budget reports. Vanguard wasn't just a corporate empire, it was my mother's legacy. She built this luxury fashion and cosmetics conglomerate from a single boutique into a global powerhouse before she passed away 3 years ago. I had dedicated every waking second of my life to preserving her blood, sweat, and tears. I looked down the table at Julian, my husband of 4 years. He was the chief operating officer, a man I had lifted out of a mid-level management position and placed right beside me. He looked pristine in his tailored charcoal suit, but today his usual warm smile was entirely missing. His eyes were cold, fixed intently on his tablet. Next to him sat Victoria, my half-sister. My father had brought her into our family when we were teenagers, a quiet, seemingly fragile girl who always played the victim. Today, however, Victoria wasn't looking fragile. She was wearing a deep crimson blazer, a color my mother had trademarked, and her lips were curled into a sharp, victorious smirk. "Evelyn," Julian spoke, his voice cutting through the rustle of corporate papers. He didn't call me honey or Eve like he usually did. His tone was strictly professional, almost clinical. "Before we approve the international expansion budget, there is a restructuring motion that requires the board's immediate attention." I paused, setting my pen down. "Restructuring? Julian, we finalized the executive structure months ago. What are you talking about?" Victoria leaned forward, resting her chin on her linked fingers. "What he means, sister, is that your services as chief executive officer are no longer required. The board has held a private vote. You are being removed, effective immediately." A short, breathless laugh escaped my lips. I looked around the table at the 12 board members. These were men and women my mother had hired, people who had known me since I was a child. But none of them would meet my gaze. They all stared at their desks, a collective wall of cowardice. "Is this a joke?" I demanded, my voice rising, though I kept my posture rigid. "I hold 51% of the voting shares under my mother's trust. You cannot vote me out. I am the majority." Julian slowly slid a thick leather folder across the polished wood toward me. "You were the majority, Evelyn. Look at page 4. With trembling fingers, I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the legal documents, and my heart dropped into a bottomless abyss. It was an amendment to my mother's trust, shifting the controlling rights to a joint marital asset clause, signed by me. "This is a forgery," I whispered, staring at my own signature at the bottom of the page. "I never signed this. Julian, what did you do?" Julian leaned back in his leather chair, completely devoid of remorse. "You signed it 3 months ago, darling. Don't you remember the stack of digital contract renewals you blindly authorized while you were deeply sleep-deprived during the Paris Fashion Week launch? You trusted me implicitly. That was your first and final mistake." Chapter 2. The Depth of the Deceit. The room began to spin, but I refused to let them see me cry. I forced my breathing to steady, looking directly at the man I had shared a bed with for nearly half a decade. "You used my exhaustion to steal my mother's company," I rasped, the sheer scale of the violation washing over me. "You wormed your way into my life, pretended to care about my grief, just to wait for the perfect moment to stab me in the back." "Oh, don't think so highly of yourself, Evelyn," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with venom as she stood up and walked toward my chair. "Julian never loved you. Do you honestly think a man like him could ever genuinely be attracted to a workaholic machine who cares more about fabric counts and profit margins than her own husband?" She stopped right behind Julian, placing her manicured hands onto his shoulders. Julian didn't flinch. Instead, he reached up, placing his hand over hers, interlacing their fingers right in front of my face. The pieces of the puzzle violently crashed together in my mind. The late-night, business trips Julian took over the past year, the expensive jewelry charges on our joint accounts that he claimed were client gifts, the sudden, uncharacteristic confidence Victoria had shown in board meetings recently. They hadn't just been stealing the company, they had been sleeping together under my nose for months, laughing at my blindness. "Victoria, you are my sister. I whispered, the betrayal burning a hole through my chest. Half-sister, Victoria corrected sharply, her eyes flashing with years of buried resentment. Your mother treated my mother like a homewrecker, and she treated me like a charity case. You always had the best clothes, the top education, the birthright. You thought you were the rightful queen of Vanguard. Well, guess what? Julian and I have been working on this transfer for over a year. Every minor board member has been bribed or leveraged. Your father's remaining shares, already transferred to me. Julian stood up, adjusting his cuffs. Security is waiting outside the door, Evelyn. You have 10 minutes to clear your personal belongings from the executive suite. If you try to contact the press, we will release the medical records we've compiled over the last 3 months. We have enough documentation of your exhaustion and erratic behavior to prove to the public that you had a mental breakdown and signed the rights away voluntarily. Don't ruin what's left of your reputation. Chapter 3. Escorted to the street. AI narration tone. Low, heavy, capturing the weight of public humiliation and isolation. 2 burly security guards in black suits stood on either side of me as I packed a single cardboard box in my office. My mother's framed portrait, a silver desk organizer she had gifted me when I graduated law school, and a few personal notebooks. That was all I was allowed to take from a lifetime of work. As I walked out of the executive elevator into the grand marble lobby of the Vanguard headquarters, the flashbulbs began to pop. Dozens of reporters were already crowding the glass entrance. Julian and Victoria hadn't just fired me. They had leaked the news to the press minutes before the meeting ended to ensure my public execution was absolute. Evelyn, is it true you've been ousted due to a severe nervous breakdown? A reporter yelled, shoving a microphone into my face as I crossed the threshold into the pouring rain. Evelyn, comment on the rumors that your husband has assumed full control to save the company from your mismanagement. Another shouted. I kept my head held high, refusing to shield my face from the rain or the cameras. I walked through the crowd, my heels clicking sharply against the wet pavement until I reached the curb. My personal driver, a man who had worked for my family for 10 years, looked at me with an apologetic, terrified expression. He wouldn't unlock the door. I'm sorry, Ms. Evelyn, he muttered through the cracked window. Mr. Julian canceled your company vehicle contract. I'm instructed to return the car to the corporate garage immediately. The window rolled back up, and the sleek black sedan pulled away, splashing cold water over my leather boots. I stood on the sidewalk of the city I used to command, holding a soggy cardboard box, completely discarded by the world. I pulled out my phone to call a cab, only to see a massive notification flashing across the screen. Your corporate bank account has been frozen. Your personal credit cards, issued under the Vanguard Imperial umbrella, have been deactivated. They hadn't just taken the company. They had stripped me of my finances, my security, and my dignity. They wanted me to starve on the streets, to completely break until I was nothing but a memory. Chapter 4. Finding the Ghost. I needed a safe haven, but my penthouse apartment was a corporate asset, meaning Julian had undoubtedly changed the locks by now. With only a few $100s of cash left in my physical purse, I took a standard city bus to the industrial district on the outskirts of the capital. Deep within the maze of abandoned textile warehouses stood a rusty, unmarked iron gate. This was the original workshop my mother had purchased 30 years ago before she became an international icon. The company had long since written it off as a dead asset, but because it was locked under an old, defunct subsidiary that Julian didn't know existed, the deed was still entirely in my name. I punched the ancient numeric code into the keypad. The lock clicked, groaning with rust. I pushed the heavy door open, stepping into a vast, dark space filled with covered sewing machines. Rolls of dusty silk, and old design sketches tacked to the walls. Who's there? A rough, defensive voice called out from the shadows of the mezzanine. A tall man in a faded black apron stepped into the dim light of the single working halogen bulb. He had sharp, piercing gray eyes, a jawline covered in rough stubble, and hands stained with dark leather dye. It was Dominic Vance. Dominic was once the most brilliant, revolutionary creative director Vanguard had ever seen. He was my mother's right-hand man, a design genius who helped build the brand's identity. But 4 years ago, right around the time Julian entered the company, Dominic was abruptly framed for a massive corporate design theft scandal. He was blacklisted from the entire fashion industry overnight. I had believed the evidence Julian presented to me back then. I had signed Dominic's termination papers myself. Dominic stared at me, his eyes narrowing as he saw my soaked clothes, my smeared makeup, and the cardboard box in my arms. Well, well, Dominic said, a bitter, cynical smile pulling at his lips as he leaned against an iron railing. Look who finally stumbled down from her ivory tower. What's the matter, Evelyn? Did you come to mock the man you ruined, or did your perfect husband finally show you his real teeth? Chapter 5. An Alliance Born in the Dust. I set the box down on a dusty work table, my hands shaking from the cold. You were right, Dominic, about everything. Dominic froze, his cynical expression faltering for a fraction of a second before he walked down the metal stairs, his heavy boots echoing through the cavernous room. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms. Excuse me. Julian framed you, I said, looking him directly in the eyes, letting all my pride drop away. He fabricated the data leak 4 years ago to get you out of the company because you were the only one smart enough to see through his financial manipulation. Today, he used the exact same tactics on me. He and Victoria altered my mother's trust. I've been stripped of my CEO title, my shares, and my home. Dominic watched me closely, searching my face for any sign of a lie. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity, filled only by the sound of rain hammering against the corrugated tin roof. Slowly, Dominic let out a long, heavy breath. He walked over to a small counter, poured a cup of black coffee from an old machine, and handed it to me. Drink, you're shivering. I took the warm mug, nodding my gratitude. I spent 4 years rotting in this place, watching Julian turn Vanguard into a soulless, mass-produced cash grab, Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. I hated you for signing those papers, Evelyn, but I hated him more. Then let's make him pay, I said, a sudden spark of absolute fury igniting in my chest. Julian thinks he won because he controls the corporate board, but he doesn't understand the creative soul of the company. He doesn't know how to design, how to manufacture, or how to command a runway. He only knows how to manipulate numbers. Dominic's sharp gray eyes flared with sudden interest. He leaned over the table, looking at the old sketches surrounding us. What are you suggesting? We start from the shadows, I whispered, my voice hardening into stone. We create an independent, underground label right here in this warehouse. We launch a collection that will completely eclipse Vanguard's upcoming spring showcase. I have the legal knowledge to dismantle their supplier contracts from the outside, and you have the genius to make the world forget Vanguard ever existed. We won't just sue them, Dominic. We will bankrupt them. Dominic looked at me, a slow, predatory smile finally breaking across his face. He held out his rough, dye-stained hand. Welcome to the underground, CEO. Let's burn their kingdom down. Chapter 6. The Stolen Collection. 3 weeks after my ouster, the headlines were filled with nothing but Julian and Victoria. They were the new golden couple of the fashion world, plastered on every business magazine. Today was Vanguard's highly anticipated midwinter preview, the first collection launched under Julian's absolute control. Dominic and I sat in the dim light of the warehouse, watching the live stream of the runway on a cracked laptop screen. As the models stepped out onto the runway, my breath hitched. The asymmetry of the coats, the specific midnight blue hue of the silk, the intricate geometric embroidery on the lapels, it was unmistakable. Those are my mother's final, unreleased sketches, I whispered, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of the desk. She drew those in her hospital bed during her final months. I kept them locked in the private safe inside the executive suite. Dominic let out a harsh, cold laugh, his gray eyes flashing with disgust. Julian didn't just steal your title, Evelyn. He emptied your vaults. Look at the tailoring, it's sloppy. He rushed the production to hit the market before the quarterly report. He's using your mother's soul to pump up the stock price. On screen, Julian and Victoria stepped onto the runway hand in hand, bowing to a standing ovation. Victoria was dripping in diamonds, waving to the cameras like royalty. "Let them celebrate," I said, a dangerous calm settling over me as I stood up and walked over to Dominic's drafting table. "They think they've used up our best assets. They don't know that my mother's true genius didn't lie in what she drew on paper. It lay in the formulas she left behind for the sustainable fabrics we never got to launch. Julian just put all his cards on the table. Now, it's our turn to play." Chapter 7, Hooking the Titan. To build an empire from dust, you need capital. Dominic and I had the designs, but we needed a backer powerful enough to shield us from Julian's legal team. There was only one man in the country who fit the bill, Marcus Vance Asterisk, no relation to Dominic, the notoriously ruthless venture capitalist who ran Vance Global Holdings. He hated Julian, and more importantly, he only invested in bloodlines of proven success. Securing a meeting with Marcus was impossible through normal channels, so I used his one weakness against him, his daily 5:00 a.m. routine at the exclusive City Athletic Club. I waited by the glass doors of his private lounge, wearing a simple, sharp black suit I had bought with the very last of my personal cash. When Marcus stepped out, flanked by 2 bodyguards, I didn't hesitate. I stepped directly into his path. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady and commanding, "you have exactly 60 seconds to decide if you want to own 50% of the company that will bankrupt Vanguard Imperial by the end of the fiscal year." Marcus stopped. He was an older man with silver hair and eyes like flint. He looked me up and down, a look of grim amusement crossing his face. "Evelyn Sterling, the disgraced princess. You've got a lot of nerve showing your face here after your husband kicked you to the curb." "Julian didn't kick me out. He stole a broken machine," I replied, stepping closer, refusing to let his guards intimidate me. "Vanguard is running on stolen momentum. Julian is a numbers guy who doesn't understand supply chains. Within 6 months, his luxury material costs will skyrocket because I am about to lock down the exclusive patents on the eco-silk my mother developed. Invest $10 million in my new label, Phoenix Horizon Asterisk, or watch someone else take the crown." Marcus stared at me for 5 agonizing seconds. Then a sharp, booming laugh escaped his chest. "$10 million? You're insane. Come to my office at noon. If your pitch deck is a minute late, I'll have you blacklisted from this city permanently." Chapter 8, Setting the Trap. We got the funding. Marcus signed the check that afternoon, but it came with a brutal condition. We had exactly 30 days to launch our first capsule collection at the upcoming Underground Fashion Gala, or he would pull the remaining capital and seize our workshop. The warehouse transformed into a war room. Dominic worked 18 hours a day, his hands raw from cutting fabric, his eyes bloodshot, but filled with a manic, creative fire I had never seen before. I handled the warfare. "Julian's biggest vulnerability is his fabric supplier in Milan," I told Dominic, laying out a map of Vanguard's global logistical routes. "He relies entirely on Textiles de Silva Asterisk for Vanguard's premium line. If they experience a delay, Vanguard's spring line will miss the retail launch date, costing them millions in department store penalties." "How are you going to stop a Milanese conglomerate from fulfilling a contract?" Dominic asked, rewriting a pattern sketch without looking up. "I'm not going to stop them," I smiled coldly. "I'm going to buy them. My mother secretly owned a 20% silent stake in De Silva's parent company. Using Marcus's legal team and his capital, I've spent the last 48 hours buying up the remaining minority shares. By tomorrow morning, I will be the majority stakeholder of Vanguard's primary supplier. When Julian sends his next material order, I will personally sign the rejection letter." Chapter 9, The First Counterattack. Julian wasn't entirely stupid. He noticed the sudden movement in the supplier markets, and it didn't take him long to trace the digital breadcrumbs back to the industrial district. On a rainy Tuesday night, while Dominic and I were finishing the final stitching on our showstopper gown, the heavy iron doors of the warehouse were violently pushed open. Julian stepped inside, accompanied by Vanguard's chief legal counsel and 3 private security guards. He looked around the dusty, industrial space with a look of profound disgust, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "Well, Evelyn," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension as he stopped right in front of our work table. "I heard rumors you were playing house in the slums, but I didn't think you, sink this low. Working with a blacklisted criminal like Dominic, you really have lost your mind." Dominic stood up, his massive frame instantly casting a shadow over Julian, but I placed a calm hand on his arm, stepping forward to face my ex-husband. "You're trespassing, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing register. "Get to the point before I have the police remove you." Julian pulled a legal injunction from his coat pocket and slapped it onto the table. "This is a cease and desist order. Vanguard Imperial owns all intellectual property related to your mother's designs, her name, and her experimental fabric research. If you release so much as a single handkerchief under your new little hobby label, I will sue you and your caveman designer into a federal prison for corporate espionage." Chapter 10. Smiling in the Dark. I didn't look at the paper. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I picked up my phone and pressed a single button, casting a live document onto the warehouse's projector screen. "You should really read your own corporate bylaws more carefully, Julian," I said smoothly, pointing to the glowing text on the wall. "When you altered my mother's trust to take control of Vanguard, you used a standard marital asset transfer clause. But that clause states that if either party files for legal divorce on the grounds of marital misconduct, any intellectual property generated asterisk prior to the marriage reverts entirely to the original bloodline heir during the litigation period." Julian's face frozen. His legal counsel immediately leaned over, staring at the screen with wide, panicked eyes. "What is she talking about?" Julian hissed, turning to his lawyer. She's right, Mr. Sterling," the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling. "If she files for divorce with proof of infidelity, the core patents for the luxury line are legally frozen until a judge rules on the asset split. You won't be able to produce the spring collection." I stepped right into Julian's personal space, looking up into his pale, sweating face. "The divorce papers were filed at the courthouse 20 minutes ago, along with 30 gigabytes of high-definition security footage of you and Victoria in my old penthouse elevator. You wanted my mother's company, Julian. Congratulations. You just inherited a shell with no materials, no patents, and a massive public relations nightmare about to break in the morning news." Julian's fist clenched so hard his manicured nails drew blood. "You think you've won, Evelyn. You haven't seen what I'm willing to do to keep that throne." He turned and stormed out into the rain, leaving the legal papers scattered on the floor. The first battle was over, but I knew the real war had just crossed the point of no return. Chapter 11. The Secret War for the Run. Julian's threat wasn't empty. The morning after our confrontation, the media went into a feeding frenzy. The leaked footage of Julian and Victoria's affair hit the internet, sending Vanguard's stock price into a sudden, steep dive. But Victoria wasn't going to crawl away into a corner. Driven by pure, unadulterated panic and jealousy, she decided to hit us where we were most vulnerable: the underground fashion gala. It was an exclusive, invite-only event where the world's wealthiest private buyers gathered, and it was supposed to be Phoenix Horizon's asterisk official debut. "She's buying up the guest list," Dominic said, slamming his phone onto the desk. He had spent the morning coordinating with the gala organizers. "Victoria contacted every major buyer invited to our showcase. She's threatening to blacklist them from Vanguard's Paris front rows if they so much as step into our pavilion." I poured a fresh cup of coffee, entirely unfazed. Let her threat stand. The kind of buyers who attend the underground gala don't like being told what to do by a corporate silver spooner like Victoria. They crave exclusivity and rebellion. The more she tells them to stay away, the more curious they will become. Dominic looked at me, his intense gray eyes softening just a fraction. He stepped closer, taking the coffee pot from my hand and setting it down. "You've changed, Evelyn. When I worked for your mother, you were always so careful, so focused on keeping the peace. Now, you look like a general waiting for a bloodbath." Peace didn't keep my mother's legacy safe, I whispered, looking up into his sharp gaze. They wanted a war, Dominic. I'm just giving them exactly what they asked for. Chapter 12. Victoria's Sabotage. The night of the gala arrived. The underground venue, a beautifully restored subterranean station, was buzzing with high society, fashion critics, and elite investors. Our pavilion was packed, Victoria's blacklist threat having completely backfired just as I predicted. The air was electric with anticipation for Dominic Vance's grand return to the design world. 10 minutes before our models were set to walk the runway, a sharp scream echoed from the dressing enclosures. Dominic and I rushed into the back room to find our lead model standing in tears. Our showstopper piece, a breathtaking, structurally revolutionary gown made entirely of our newly patented eco-silk, had been completely destroyed. Someone had sneaked into the dressing area and poured heavy industrial acid across the front panel, melting the pristine white fabric into a charred, blackened ruin. Standing near the exit door, trying to blend into the crowd of stagehands, was Victoria's personal assistant. Dominic's face turned into a mask of pure fury, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles popped. That took 3 weeks of manual embroidery. It's unfixable. The collection is ruined. No, it isn't, I said, my voice cutting through the panic of the room like a razor. I grabbed a pair of heavy fabric shears from the work table and walked straight toward the destroyed gown. Evelyn, what are you doing? Dominic gasped. I didn't answer. With swift, precise cuts, I shredded the melted bottom half of the gown, removing the damaged white silk entirely. I grabbed a roll of raw, midnight black leather from Dominic's supply cart, the very leather he had been using for his structural corsets, and began draping it violently over the remaining white bodice, pinning it with raw steel clips. Dominic, don't just stand there, I commanded, looking over my shoulder with a fierce, burning gaze. This isn't a tragedy anymore. It's a declaration. Retailor this into an asymmetric armor dress. Show them what happens when the phoenix gets burned. Chapter 13. The Underground Rebirth. The lights in the main hall dimmed. The heavy, industrial bass of the music began to shake the concrete floor. When our lead model stepped out onto the runway wearing the heavily modified, half-shredded white silk and midnight black leather armor dress, the crowd went dead silent. It wasn't just fashion, it was high-art rebellion. The raw steel clips caught the harsh studio lights, flashing like blades. It was a visual representation of my survival, beautiful, scarred, and deadly. The moment the final model cleared the runway, the room erupted into a roaring, deafening standing ovation. Major international buyers stood on their chairs, demanding immediate order sheets. Marcus Vance stepped out from the VIP section, a massive, rare grin on his face as he walked up to me and Dominic. 10 million was a steal. You two didn't just launch a label tonight, you just put a bullet in Vanguard's reputation. From the dark corners of the mezzanine balcony, Julian and Victoria watched the applause. Victoria was hyperventilating, her face pale with humiliation, while Julian's eyes were locked onto me with a mixture of profound shock and a dark, toxic realization. He had spent years trying to control me, thinking I was just a fragile corporate heiress. Now, he was looking at a woman who could completely obliterate him. Chapter 14. The Bitter Prince. 2 hours after the showcase, while the crew was packing up the equipment, Julian cornered me in the empty VIP lounge. He looked desperate, his expensive tie loosened, his hair messy. Evelyn, he said, stepping toward me, his hands raised defensively. We need to talk, privately, without your caveman designer hovering around. You have 30 seconds, Julian, I said, sitting casually on the edge of a leather sofa, not even bothering to look up at him. The board is panicking, Julian confessed, his voice shaking with a terrifying mix of pride and fear. The affair leak, the frozen patents. Our stock dropped 15% today alone. The investors are demanding your return, but they want me to handle the operations. Let's call off the divorce, Eve. We can merge Phoenix Horizon back into Vanguard. You can have your CEO title back. We can fix this together. I let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh. You really are pathetic, aren't you? You didn't care about fixing this when you were altering my mother's trust or sleeping with my stepsister in our bed. You only care now because your throne is burning." Julian's desperate facade instantly cracked, revealing the ugly, insecure monster underneath. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrists, pulling me up. "Don't get arrogant with me. You think Marcus Vance actually cares about you. He's using you to get to Vanguard's assets. Without me, you're nothing but a bitter woman playing in the dirt." A heavy hand suddenly clamped down on Julian's shoulder. Dominic didn't just push him. He violently wrenched Julian away from me, slamming him against the brick pillar behind us. Dominic's eyes were wild, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Touch her again," Dominic whispered, his forearm pressing hard against Julian's throat, "and I will personally ensure you never walk a runway or enter a boardroom again. Get out of our sight." Chapter 15. Deepening Shadows. Julian scrambled away, coughing and adjusting his coat, his eyes darting between Dominic and me with intense, venomous hatred before he fled into the night. The lounge went quiet. My heart was racing, not from fear of Julian, but from the raw, protective intensity radiating from Dominic. He turned to me, his breathing heavy, his hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice instantly dropping all its hostility as he stepped into my space, his gray eyes searching my face for any sign of hurt. "I'm fine," I said softly, looking up at him. For the first time in 4 years, I felt completely safe. Julian's touch had always felt like a calculation, a transaction. Dominic's presence felt like an anchor in a storm. "Thank you, Dominic." He reached out, his rough, dye-stained fingers gently brushing a stray strand of wet hair behind my ear. His touch was incredibly warm against my cold skin. "I told you before, Evelyn. I hated him for what he did to the company, but I hated him more for what he did to you. I'm not going to let him hurt you again. Not ever." We stood there in the shadows of the underground station, the distance between us completely dissolving. The corporate war was far from over, but as I looked into Dominic's eyes, I knew I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Julian and Victoria had taken everything from me, but in doing so, they had unleashed the two people who knew exactly how to tear their world apart. Chapter 16. The Desperate Strike. Vanguard Imperial was on the verge of bankruptcy. In just 1 month, our new label, Phoenix Horizon Asterisk, had eaten up 40% of their market share. Julian's suppliers had completely dried up because I owned the patents to the eco-silk, and Victoria's public reputation was in tatters. Driven by pure, unadulterated desperation, Victoria realized she was losing everything. She couldn't handle that I had risen from the ashes, and she certainly couldn't handle seeing me with Dominic, the brilliant man she had helped Julian frame years ago. Late on a Thursday night, while I was working alone in the warehouse office finishing our quarterly tax strategies, Victoria walked through the open iron gates. She didn't look like a glamorous corporate executive anymore. Her hair was messy, her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were wild. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Evelyn?" she spat, walking slowly toward my desk. "You always had to be the perfect daughter, the rightful heir. Even when you were kicked to the street, you still managed to steal the spotlight." "I didn't steal anything, Victoria," I said without looking up from my laptop. "I simply took back what my mother built. You and Julian are just terrible at running a business." "This company belongs to me now," she shrieked, suddenly pulling a small canister of flammable industrial solvent from her designer handbag. Before I could react, she began pouring the chemical all over our fabric racks, splashing it across rows of completed garments. "If I can't have Vanguard, and I can't have the fashion world, then you don't get your precious little Rebirth either." She pulled a silver lighter from her pocket, her thumb resting on the spark wheel, her face twisted into a manic, venomous grin. Chapter 17. Extinguishing the Flame. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible, forcing my voice to remain completely calm and icy. "Put the lighter down, Victoria. If you ignite this room, you won't just destroy the fabric, you'll burn alive with it." "I don't care," she wept, her voice cracking with years of buried envy. "Julian is packing his bags. The board is going to vote to remove us both tomorrow morning anyway. I have nothing left. You never had anything to begin with, I said, stepping out from behind the desk, drawing her attention away from the door. You let Julian use your jealousy to do his dirty work. He never loved you, Victoria. He just needed a pawn to get to my father's shares. Shut up, she screamed, her hand shaking violently as she raised the lighter. A heavy shadow materialized directly behind her. Dominic had just returned from the loading dock. Before Victoria could flick the wheel, Dominic lunged forward, grabbing her wrist in an iron grip and wrenching the lighter from her fingers. He twisted her arm behind her back, pinning her safely against the concrete pillar. Victoria dissolved into loud, pathetic tears, her strength completely vanishing as she sank to the floor in chains of her own making. I walked over, picked up her fallen handbag, and pulled out her cell phone. It was currently on an active, open call with Julian. He had been listening to the entire thing, waiting to see if she would successfully burn our progress to the ground. Julian, I said into the microphone, my voice dropping to a freezing register. Your little distraction failed. I hope your bags are packed tight, because tomorrow morning the board belongs to me. Chapter 18, Reclaiming the Boardroom. The next morning, the Vanguard Imperial boardroom was dead silent. The 12 board members sat in the exact same seats they had occupied when they betrayed me, looking absolutely terrified. Julian sat at the head of the table, his face pale, sweat dripping down his tailored collar. The heavy mahogany doors swung open. I walked in, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored white suit designed by Dominic. Behind me walked Dominic himself, carrying a leather briefcase, followed by Marcus Vance and a team of federal financial investigators. Julian tried to muster his old arrogance, standing up. Evelyn, you can't just barge in here. This is a private executive session. Not anymore, Marcus Vance announced, throwing a thick stack of acquisition documents onto the table. Over the last 72 hours, Vance Global Holdings has acquired 45% of Vanguard's outstanding public stock from panicking investors. Combined with Evelyn's original, restored trust shares, she now controls 65% of this company. I walked straight to the head of the table, looking down at Julian. Get out of my chair, Julian. Julian's face twisted in rage. You can't do this. I am the chief operating officer. My contract requires a 2/3 board vote to terminate. We have the votes, Mr. Sterling, the chief legal counsel, the same man who had helped Julian betray me, but had now quickly switched sides to save his own skin, said timidly. Furthermore, the federal investigators behind Ms. Evelyn are here to arrest you. Chapter 19, The Fall of the Thieves. Julian froze. Arrest me, for what? Dominic stepped forward, opening his briefcase and sliding a massive ledger across the table. For corporate embezzlement, fraud, and systematic tax evasion. For the past 4 years. You've been funneling millions from Vanguard's international shipping accounts into private offshore shells in the Cayman Islands. I traced the digital signatures back to your personal IP address yesterday. This is a setup, Julian screamed, turning to the board members. Help me, I saved this company. But none of them would look at him. They stared at their desks, just like they had done to me a month ago. 2 federal agents stepped into the room, handcuffs catching the fluorescent lights. They grabbed Julian by his arms, forcing his hands behind his back. The pristine, arrogant executive was completely broken, screaming and cursing as he was dragged past me out into the hallway. As he passed the door, he saw 2 police officers escorting Victoria in handcuffs as well, her signed confession for the attempted arson tucked safely into an officer's folder. They had built their entire partnership on greed, jealousy, and lies, and now they were going to spend the next decade sharing adjacent prison cells. Chapter 20, The New Era of Vanguard. That afternoon, the grand logo on the front of the 50th floor skyscraper was officially changed from Vanguard Imperial to Vanguard Horizon ***. I stood in my mother's old executive office, looking out through the massive glass windows at the sprawling city below. The soggy cardboard box was gone, replaced by pristine design awards, sustainable fabric samples, and the restored portrait of my mother smiling proudly from the wall. The door clicked open, and Dominic walked in, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He had traded his faded work apron for a sharp, tailored black blazer, looking every bit the multi-million-dollar creative director he was always meant to be. "The market closed 10 minutes ago," Dominic smiled, handing me a glass. "Vanguard Horizon stock bounced back by 30%. The industry is calling it the greatest corporate turnaround in modern history." "We did it, Dominic," I said softly, clinking my glass against his. "We took it all back." Dominic set his glass down on the desk, stepping into my personal space. The heavy, intense gaze that had anchored me through the darkest days of the underground warehouse was now filled with absolute warmth. He placed his large, warm hands on my waist, pulling me gently against him. "We didn't just take it back, Evelyn," he whispered, his gray eyes locking onto mine. "We made it better, and this time nobody is ever going to stand in your way again." I leaned up, closing the distance between us, sealing our victory with a kiss that felt like the true beginning of our lives. The stepsister's jealousy had failed, the husband's greed had destroyed him, and from the ashes of betrayal, a new empire had risen, built on absolute genius, unstoppable resilience, and a love that was completely unbreakable. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel.